There's something deeply humbling about being human. We are limited. Limited in time, limited in knowledge, limited in perspective. No one knows everything. Not the scientist, not the historian, not the politician, not the journalist, not you, not me. If it rained on February 14th and I stood in it, I saw the rain fall from the sky, I felt the wetness on my skin. I know it rained. That is a direct experience. But if someone asked me why it rained, I could give a rough explanation. Water evaporates, it condensates, it forms clouds, temperature and pressure carries the clouds, and under the right circumstances, rain falls. Now that sounds reasonable, but I wouldn't put too much confidence in my explanation. If someone truly demanded precision, I would say rely on a meteorologist. If they asked what is rain or water exactly, I could say it's two hydrogen atoms bonded to an oxygen atom, but I would rely on a chemist. If they pressed further, how do environmental variables affect H2O at different atmospheric levels? Well, now I'm reaching, and I would rely on a physicist. Unless I've dedicated my life in mastering these disciplines, I'm trusting someone else's expertise. I can know a little about a lot of things, or a lot about a few things, but I cannot know everything. At some point, no matter how intelligent the person is, they must rely on the trustworthiness of someone else in areas beyond their direct experience. Human knowledge is a network of trust, and trust requires faith. Not blind faith, but faith nonetheless. Now take that same reality and apply it to history. I went to public schools here in the United States, and I was taught about World War II, about Adolf Hitler, about the Holocaust, about the Allied powers. I was taught to have pride in the defeat of evil. That education helped shape my moral framework, and I trusted the system that taught me it. But here's the reality. History comes through people, and I want you to consider something. Can you remember a time when something you were taught by someone you trusted was later challenged with new information? A moment that you once felt certain about that began to shift. In my case, I grew up in the Mormon church, and I was taught that a group of people migrated from Jerusalem to the American continent, that they became the Nephites and the Lamanites, and that the Native Americans were their descendants. I trusted the people who taught me this, and because I trusted them, I believed it. But a time came when I began to ask questions. I started looking for answers outside the framework that I had inherited. I encountered information I had never been exposed to before. I learned of historical and archaeological debates, questions about metallurgy, about horses in the ancient Americas, and about geographical correlation. Some of these debates unsettled me, not necessarily because I had definitive answers, but because I had realized that there had been discussions I had never been exposed to. It wasn't simply the questions themselves, it was the feeling that the important complexities had not been addressed. That experience caused me to lose trust in the people who had originally taught me. And when trust erodes, belief often follows. What began as questioning specific claims expanded into questioning much more. I compared what I had been taught with broader historical and biblical criticisms. In that process, my trust did not just shift regarding Mormonism, it shifted toward Christianity as a whole. And for a season, I felt deceived. And when someone feels deceived, they begin to reevaluate everything. That is a human pattern. People interpret, people teach, people frame, and people are influenced by culture, incentives, powers, and biases. But that does not always mean deception. It does mean filtration. Two people can examine the same event and walk away with two very different conclusions. Take 9/11. One person studies the official investigation and concludes it was a terrorist attack orchestrated by Al-Qaeda. Another examines failures, inconsistencies, and unanswered questions and feels the response was incomplete and mishandled. Why? Because interpretation sits atop of information, and information is rarely experienced in totality. It comes through media, through documentaries, through institutional reports, through people that are already trusted. If someone begins from a position of institutional trust, they weigh official findings heavily. If someone begins from skepticisms, they scrutinize those same findings more intensely. It's not always about intelligence, it's about framework. And frameworks are shaped by experience. Someone who has witnessed institutional deception may default toward suspicion. Someone who believes institutions are generally stable may default toward trust. Both can be sincere, both can believe they are pursuing truth, but both filter the same information through different lenses. Information flows through systems. Systems built by people. People with power. And power influences which narratives are amplified, which questions are prioritized, and which voices are elevated. That does not automatically mean fabrication, but it does mean influence. Power has gravity, and gravity bends perception. So often the difference in conclusions is less about raw evidence and more about baseline trust. Now let's look at something current, the Epstein case. A man convicted of horrific crimes, connections to wealth and influence, a death in federal custody, files released over time, names debated, information redacted. Some trust the official explanation, some do not. The same information produces different interpretations, depending on the framework brought to it. Some see incompetence, some see institutional self-protection, some see corruption, some see tragic failure. We do not sit in every investigation. We do not see every private conversation. We evaluate what is presented to us, and what is presented to us comes through systems. And humans, especially when given wealth and influence, have incentives. When information feels incomplete, trust erodes. When powerful individuals appear insulated, people recalibrate their baseline trust. Some of that distrust may be overreach. Some of it may be warranted, but the shift itself is real. And once trust fractures in one high-profile case, it rarely stays contained. It reshapes how people interpret everything else. History, government, media, institutions. That is not conspiracy thinking, that is human psychology. When baseline trust shifts, perception shifts with it. That is why humility is essential. Because when distrust rises, there is a temptation to swing to extremes, from blind trust to total suspicion. But wisdom lives in neither. Wisdom lives in disciplined discernment. You can recognize power incentives without inventing certainty. You can acknowledge institutional failure without declaring universal corruption. You can sense something feels incomplete without claiming hidden knowledge. Instincts matter, but instinct must also be tested against evidence. Because faith is not chaos. Faith aligned with goodness remains anchored. And humility alone is not passive. There are moments in history when waiting for perfect certainty would mean abandoning moral courage. The abolitionists did not wait for slaveholders to admit wrong. Civil rights leaders did not wait for unanimous comfort before declaring segregation unjust. Moral clarity sometimes precedes full disclosure. So what then separates reckless belief from righteous faith? Alignment. Reckless belief chases drama. Righteous faith aligns with principle. If something protects the vulnerable, lean toward it. If something exposes exploitation, lean toward it. If something resists corruption, lean toward it. Not because you know every detail, but because your conscience recognizes good. We may never have access to every file. We may never know every hidden conversation. We may never untangle every institutional decision, but we can align our hearts. Faith is unavoidable. Faith in institutions, faith in media, faith in data, faith in independent voices, faith in God. The question is not whether you have faith. The question is where you place it. And here's where I must be clear. When I say disciplined humility guided by righteous faith, I mean my faith is in God, in Jesus Christ, in the evidence that I've studied, and the history that I have wrestled with, and the spiritual confirmation I believe I've received. I understand that not everyone shares that foundation. Some ground their worldview in material explanations, and some in evolutionary theory, some in social contract or survival dynamics. And here is where my tension becomes real. If survival is the highest aim, then humility can appear weak. Mercy can appear insufficient. Self-sacrifice can seem irrational. Turning the other cheek can feel naive. From that framework, humility can be exploited. But from my framework, humility is strength. Because I do not believe survival is the highest aim. I believe righteousness is. I believe truth is. I believe alignment with God is. And that changes everything. It means I choose integrity, even if it costs advantage. Mercy, even if it costs leverage. Humility, even if it is mistaken for weakness. My faith does not rest on evolutionary footing. It rests on eternal accountability. And that does not make me passive. Christ taught love, but he confronted corruption. He preached mercy, but he overturned tables. So disciplined humility is not blindness. It is anchored discernment. And yes, that creates a fundamental difference in worldview. Not because one side is unintelligent, not because one side is evil, but because one side believes morality is ultimately anchored in God, and the other believes morality emerges from natural processes. Foundational beliefs shape interpretation. So when I speak of faith, I'm not speaking of ignorance. I'm speaking of allegiance. Allegiance to a truth I believe is eternal. Because if Christ is who he claimed to be, then truth exists independent of influence. And if truth exists independent of power, then humility before God is not weakness, it's clarity. We are limited. Experts are limited by expertise. History is filtered. Narratives are shaped. But alignment of heart is the anchor. In a world flooded with information, your greatest safeguard is not access to more data. It is disciplined humility guided by righteous faith. Because in the end, the only history you can know with certainty is the one you are living right now. And truth, however you approach it, will always, always require faith.